Hello, this is Annie. I'm going to be talking today about the hidden meaning of the song from the 1940 animated classic Pinocchio, When You Wish Upon a Star. I'd love to play it to you, but then I'd have Mr. Disney's lawyers jumping all over me. But hopefully you remember Jiminy Cricket singing to Pinocchio that when you wish upon a star, it makes no difference where you are, your dreams come true. So, because it comes from a film for children, you may have assumed that wishing upon a star is just a quaint childhood fantasy that has no substance. But it is in fact completely true that when you wish upon a star, your dreams do come true. The song's lyrics are a simplified way of describing a cosmological process that the alchemists of old knew all about. And so did the original composers of the old Etruscan myth about a naughty wooden puppet whose name meant pineal gland or third eye. In my book, Stories in the Stars, I unravel the hidden messages in many ancient myths, including the original folk tale of Pinocchio, which, in its bare bones, is yet another hero's journey. The tale of one who has to face many trials and dragons in order to return home a full man, or in the case of Pinocchio, a real boy. He undergoes an alchemical transformation, and this is where wishing on a star comes into it. The alchemists of old wouldn't dream of going ahead with any of the 7 steps of the process to create the Philosopher's Stone until the right planet was in the right place to receive their prayers. In fact, the original meaning of the word laboratory is derived from the Latin term ora et labora, or place of prayer and work. Of course, that was before the so-called scientists of the woefully-misnamed Age of Enlightenment threw out the baby with the bathwater in jettisoning spirit from matter. But as the song goes, it makes no difference where you are, but it does matter when and to which star you're addressing yourself. All this knowledge was taught in the mystery schools because it was understood to be key to the successful completion of the alchemical journey of the spirit in a human body here on Earth. The purpose of this quest is so that we can evolve into what is represented by the symbol of the Philosopher's Stone, the stone that touches all into gold. So make yourself comfortable and get ready to hear an extract from my book, Stories in the Stars. It is from chapter 10, When You Wish Upon a Star. And I hope it helps you recognize how wishing upon a star could magnetize your desired future towards you. That was just a short extract from Stephen Newton's hauntingly beautiful Two Worlds. I'll be playing it in full at the end of this video. And by the way, it's up for a NAMA Music Award, so I put a link in the description box below if you'd like to vote for it. Anyway, back to learning about wishing upon a star as part of our own hero or heroine's journey. You probably know that it was the mythologist Joseph Campbell who first discovered the hero with the 1,000 faces. He found that most folk tales about mythical heroes worldwide followed a similar blueprint. So I'm going to quote him here on what exactly the hero's journey is. A hero ventures forth from the world of common day into a region of supernatural wonder. Fabulous forces are there encountered, and a decisive victory is won. The hero comes back from this mysterious adventure with the power to bestow boons on his fellow man. However, it was another mythologist, me, Annie Dieu-Le-Veut, who discovered that the hero's journey is built on an astrological and alchemical template. And so now here, I'm not only going to explain to you how it works, but I'll also be teaching you how you can make it work for you. The student of the ancient mystery teachings knew that in choosing the human journey, we have willingly entered into supernatural enchantment that has as its aim the act of redeeming our ancestors, just as Pinocchio saved Geppetto from the belly of the whale. And in completing that quest, we will light a path forward for succeeding generations to come. Now, I should quickly point out that the sort of alchemy you'll discover in the hero's journey, as laid down here in my book Stories in the Stars, will not necessarily involve you having to invest in equipment like test tubes or Bunsen burners. It is an inner alchemy that, when practiced properly, attuned with the stars above and the ancestors below, aligns our lives with natural forces, otherwise known as spirits or gods and goddesses, who can then help us to make the right choices. These otherworldly entities, in turn, allow and show us how to map out our lives according to our chosen vocation or destiny. The science of alchemy takes a much more holographic view of the universe than modern Western science, by acknowledging the spirit or energy inherent in all matter and which can be consulted in inner space. The alchemists of old had a prayer or meditation room within his aura et labora or laboratory to retreat into, to quiet his senses and journey inwards, to commune with the inner spirit or God of the material he was working on. So before the advent of Christianity, to whom would he have been praying? Well, it very much depended on three factors that were variable. Firstly, the culture he was born into. Secondly, the material he was working on. And finally, the aim of his operation. But whatever his intention, it would have always included petitioning the spiritual ruler of the material he was going to transform, and at the right time. This is because everything in nature, right down to the smallest blade of grass, has what is known as a planetary governor. In other words, it is ruled by those same gods and goddesses that the hero meets on his journey. This cosmic ruler is vital to any alchemical operation being successful. Without the willing cooperation of a certain planetary governor at a certain time, no magic can take place. So the astrological part of this has been written about by Mark Edmund Jones in his book, The Interpretation of a Horoscope. And I'm just going to read it to you now. The planets are the dynamic bodies that distribute the forces of actual living and experience, setting up the strains and stresses of life, and creating the basic complex in which you have your existence. You live by working against dynamic compulsions, struggling back and forth, interacting with the universe. You and the universe have a partnership in activity. You are shadowboxing with the universe every minute of your existence. Even your dreams are the shadowboxing you do when you're asleep. The planets are the bodies in the heavens which articulate the forces or express the system of energy of which the universe is composed. The planets in your chart represent your distribution of this energy or show what part of it you have made your own. And that's the end of that quote, so I'll give you a few seconds to absorb that. I just think it's brilliant, this idea of shadowboxing with the universe that we are every second of the day. So we are born into human bodies or vessels which constitute our alchemical container for this great work to take us through a form of alchemical evolution. Thus, the planetary governors are arranged at our birth in a predetermined and customized configuration, which gives us our character with all its specific strengths and weaknesses, and also gives rise to our challenges. This is why the passage of the hero's journey is around the 12 astrological signs of the wheel of the zodiac, with the planetary governors coming in to help or challenge according to whatever stage he or we are at. Every single mythological hero walks the circle of the constellations. Even Pinocchio, who in the original story has 36 adventures, in other words, one for every decan of each of the 12 signs. The planetary governors help us in a crisis, but they may have also caused the crisis. Our growth comes from dealing with adversity, and in myths about the hero, it is most often when the dragon appears. That's when we're really tested. When we are resisting by fighting against our destiny or dragon, or feeling depressed and frustrated about an important part of our life, it is often an indication that we're at a crucial part of our spiritual development. So who are these gods that rule every second of our lives? Because we need to know who they are and when to ask them for help. There are 7 altogether, and each is identified with a planet in our solar system. In myths, they are symbolized in various guises, from the 7 sages to the 7 dwarfs in Snow White. The 7 also govern one day of each week. So think of it as advice centers opening. Each god or goddess's advice center opens on its name day during the first hour after the sun has risen. Now, I'm now going to give you detailed information about the qualities of each of them to help you decide which one to appeal to for what and when. We begin on Sunday, the day, obviously, of the sun. Now, both the sun and moon are not technically planets, but they are the most influential stellar bodies in our solar system in a myriad of ways. And the dance they perform together at the times of eclipses, known in alchemy as the marriage of the sun and the moon, makes them primary drivers of the most powerful catalysts for transformation and fertility. So here we go. First of all, we're going to talk about the sun. The sun represents the masculine ego, and it rules the astrological sign of Leo. Its perpetual flames are what give the leonine personality its mane, that represents its magnanimous and warm-hearted generosity of spirit. As the ruler of the solar system, in which even gravity itself is governed by the sun, he beams down like a kind patriarch over all his kingdom as he rises across the skies in his chariot from dawn until dusk. We often find the character that represents the sun entering the myths of the hero when the protagonist reaches the age of young adulthood, such as was the case with Gilgamesh, Hercules, and even Arthur, to name but a few. He comes in to act as a guide and a teacher to help the hero develop his courage, learn the virtues of loyalty, nobility, and generosity, and to overcome his pride and selfishness. The sun can take the form of a father or an older relative like an uncle or even grandfather, or even an earlier ancestor who acts as a teacher to the hero. He leads by example so that the young man has an ideal role model to follow as he begins to plot his path forward. I mean, this is particularly important if your mother or father were not good role models. You need to go quite a way back along your DNA line to find someone who can really advise you sagely. Sometimes, though, the lessons can be harsh, like in the Epic of Gilgamesh, when the sun god sends Enkidu a fatal illness for insulting the Lady of Fortune, Ishtar. The sun is found in Babylonian myths as Shamash, in Greek myths as Helios, and in Celtic myths as Goanya, Belinos, or Lu. As a Leo, I am ruled by the sun, and so he is the planetary governor I'm most familiar with, and I send my wishes to him most often. He is there every day, albeit sometimes hidden behind quintessentially British grey clouds. But I always sense his presence, and he opens my heart, informs my warmth, friendliness and generosity. I've worked magically with the sun for a long time. I once made an alchemical tincture with the herb eyebright, which is governed by the sun. But the most powerful solar work that I've done was to repeat regularly over 40 days and 40 nights, a potent Vedic mantra dedicated to the sun. The sounds made by Vedic mantras are built on the same geometrical frequencies and resonances that I describe in Chapter 3, the holographic universe of music. So I experienced in this way building an energetic sun temple in the deeps of the underworld, which ended up playing a pivotal role in my shamanic work on the land. So, his day of the week is Sunday, and his advice centre is open for the first hour after dawn on that day. And he represents the alchemical stage of the marriage of the sun and the moon, which is the last stage just before the production of the Philosopher's Stone, and symbolised in the heavens during an eclipse by the diamond ring. Now on to Monday. And obviously with the name like Monday, it is the day of the moon. The moon rules Cancer, and she is generally portrayed as the watery, reflective pools of energy that can act as a mirror for our lives, holding all the memories, both consciously remembered and buried in the subconscious, deep in its submarine depths. As governor of the tides of the seas and the bodily fluids, she is also the ruler of the times and tides of man. Her magnetic pull rules over world affairs as a whole, and not just in the inner being of the hero. But he can keep in step with her dance if he aligns himself spiritually to her three sides of maiden at the new moon, mother at the full moon, and crone at the old or dark moon. She is definitely female, and I have quite a shy and reverential attitude towards her, because her cool beauty, grace, and wisdom often stun me into awed silence. She is utterly mysterious and yet immensely powerful and effective. It's an amazing combination. In a way, she is the essence of femininity, which is quietly tenacious, yet not overbearing or ostentatious in its manner. So her day of the week is Monday, and her advice centre is open for the first hour after dawn on that day. As mentioned before, it is the alchemical stage of the marriage of the sun and the moon, symbolised by the diamond ring of the eclipse, and the last stage before the production of the Philosopher's Stone. And so now we're going to come on to Tuesday, and this is where things get a little bit more interesting, because in Anglo-Saxon English, Tuesday is literally Tuesday, named after the god Tiw and spelt T-I-W. To the Romans, though, Tiw was known as Mars. Mars is a little bit of a different kettle of fish. He's much more martial than Tiw, but they are both war gods in their different ways. It's just Tiw's a bit more intelligent about it. But we're going to talk about Mars. So Mars rules both Aries and Scorpio, and as we follow the journey of the zodiac hero, we discover those much needed martial warlike qualities through meeting our challenges over time. The hero begins his journey along the wheel of the zodiac at the spring equinox in the sign of Aries. At this stage, he is portrayed as the immature, fiery, thrusting hothead who is far more likely to rely on pure brute force to overcome his adversaries than his wits, which he has yet to develop. As the Chinese military strategist Sun Tzu pointed out in his 6th century BCE military treatise, The Art of War, the wise warrior only goes into battle when all other recourses, such as intelligence and the arts of diplomacy, have failed. And even then, only when he knows not only that he will win, but also how his victory will be assured. Sadly, our warrior at Aries has not yet developed the wit and wisdom of Sun Tzu, and so he is displaying the undeveloped qualities of Mars. However, if all goes to plan, by the time he gets around the wheel of the zodiac to Scorpio, which is also governed by Mars, he will be better prepared to learn how to be a great spiritual warrior, which is just as well, because this is when he has to face his greatest trials, more about which anon. The Roman Mars was derived from the Greek Ares, but the source for both was the Babylonian Nergal. As a fertility god of the underworld, Nergal was responsible for the uprushing fire from the earth at springtime, which forces the sap of the greenery upwards. That is why alchemists always began their operations on the spring equinox, to take full advantage of that flaming force. I once made an alchemical spagyric that was dedicated to Mars. I'd used nettles as the material, which I'd picked from Glastonbury Tor at dawn on a Tuesday. It was just a practice exercise at the time. I had no reason to use it then, and it just sat in my cupboard for a very long time. My life was so calm and eventful in those days that I couldn't imagine I'd ever need the strength and the cunning of a warrior. But one day, without going into too much revealing detail, I did. I really did. Luckily, I remembered the Mars spagyric in my cupboard, so I took a few drops in a glass of water, and I promise you, it's no exaggeration to say that I was instantly transformed in how I felt inside. It was almost as if I felt energetically, as if I was holding a sharp sword straight at my enemy's throat, in that the words I delivered were mightier than the sword. When I spoke to him, he turned tail as if on a sixpence and ran, and he never came back. To this day, I keep this etheric sword in its scabbard around my waist. Sometimes people can see it glinting there, and they know I wouldn't hesitate to pull it out if required. So it's quite useful. You never actually have to get it out. Just have it glinting so people can see it. So Mars' day of the week is Tuesday, and his advice centre is open for the first hour after dawn on that day. His alchemical stage that he governs is the one of calcination, which is the first stage of making the Philosopher's Stone. So now we're going on to the next day, Wednesday, which is ruled by the Anglo-Saxon god Woden. It is Woden's day. To the Romans, however, he was Mercury. So let's talk about Mercury, as that's the one most people would be familiar with. Mercury rules both Gemini and Virgo, and his epithet of Quicksilver Messenger explains his influence in those signs, which is largely about the lightning-fast processing and communication of information. Whether this is going across the synapses of the brain or across the world via transport, trading routes and telecommunications, or holographically across the three worlds of the shaman. There are some who call Mercury a trickster god. I think he was the prototype for Puck in Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream. So he can seem to be quite crafty and mischievous at times, especially when he goes retrograde. But that is because I think he has to be, and that is all for our own good in the end. The retrograde thing of Mercury is actually an illusion from Earth. He never actually goes backwards in reality. But when it looks to us as if Mercury is in retrograde, we can expect all sorts of communication breakdowns and travel snarl-ups along this road less travelled. Mercury was known as Nabu to the Babylonians, Thoth to the Egyptians, Odin to the Norse, and the wing-footed messenger Hermes to the Greeks. But I have my own personal experience as a writer, and I think he is the Welsh god Gwydion, who you would have read about in my books, also known as Poet of Poets. I have to admit that I would be lost without him. He is always there, inspiring my words, and often when I'm stuck coming up with the bon mot or the next cunning twist in the plot line. I'm very lucky to have him as my muse. Mercury also plays a catalytic and thus pivotal role in every alchemical operation, no matter which planet governs the material or the stage or the process. His day of the week is Wednesday, and so his advice center is open for the first hour after dawn on that day. As for his alchemical stage that he rules over, as I said, Mercury is the prime catalyst of the whole operation, but he is particularly present when going through the dissolution stage, which is the penultimate step before the final marriage of the sun and the moon at coagulation. There are times when we feel that our lives are spinning out of control and everything we do goes wrong and falls apart, no matter how hard we try to get it right. That is often a sign that our alchemical journey has reached the coagulation stage, ruled by Mercury. And it can be a bit confusing when all kinds of weird stuff that you didn't knowingly intend or cause starts popping up all around you. It only starts to make sense when you realize it's just your future rushing towards you. Now, we'll go on to Thursday. Thursday is named after the Norse god Thor, and the Roman equivalent is Jupiter. So we'll stick with Jupiter because that's the one most people are familiar with. Jupiter rules both Sagittarius and Pisces. In fact, he is the judge who the hero first meets when he falls down at Scorpio into the halls of judgment in the underworld. There, all the deeds of his life, whether well-intentioned or not, rise like the dead from their graves to meet him. It is St. John of the Cross's dark night of the soul, or when, to put it in Jungian terms, the hero is required to face and heal his shadow. If he passes those trials and is pronounced fit to become a hero, he then goes on to be presented with the Hallows. The outcome varies in myths, but in some, if he has won the Hallows and redeemed the ancestors, which is what it means, it will automatically release his father from captivity in the underworld to be reborn on the winter solstice. Or sometimes he himself is reincarnated as a baby called the Radiant Child. Jupiter reappears later on to guide the young child as he reaches Pisces, to help him widen his vision and to give him confidence and courage to grab hold of new adventures and challenges in his first tentative explorations in trying to discover the meaning and purpose of human life. So really he is at the beginning of the journey again as he comes up to Aries, where he will set off again as the hero of 1,000 faces. Jupiter was known to the Babylonians as Marduk, to the Saxons and Norse as Thor, and to the Greeks as Zeus. My own experience of Jupiter is one of expansiveness and joy, and also the thrill that comes when starting a new venture. When I want to call upon Jupiter, I sometimes burn juniper berries. His day of the week is Thursday, and so his advice center is open for the first hour after dawn on that day. And the alchemical stage that he governs over is sublimation. Now on to Friday. Our day Friday is named after the Norse goddess Freya. But to the Babylonians she was Ishtar, and to the Greeks she was Aphrodite, and to the Romans she was Venus. So let's stick with Venus because that's the one most people are familiar with. And in fact, Venus is probably the planetary governor that we're the most familiar with. You'll most likely already know that the Lady of Fortune is associated with love, beauty, harmony, proportion, and order. Venus governs both Taurus and Libra, thus first appearing to the young mythological warrior when he has not yet developed enough maturity to know how to handle a relationship with any woman, let alone a goddess. He tends to go at her like a bull in a china shop. So, as is very well illustrated in the Epic of Gilgamesh, he is usually swiftly ejected out of Taurus at the end of her delicate foot, and as a result of offending her, he suffers a reversal of fortune. This is what I was mentioning earlier about Enkidu. This downturn in his luck leads him into a number of challenging tests and trials that help him to develop his wisdom and qualities of leadership. So when he gets to meet Venus again at Libra to receive her sexual initiation, he is more mature and considered in his behavior, and thus matters between them are usually more harmonious and fruitful, not to put too fine a point on it. Venus was Inanna to the Sumerians, Ishtar to the Babylonians, Isis to the Egyptians, Freya to the Norse, and Aphrodite to the Greeks. Her day of the week is Friday, and so her advice centre is open for the first hour after dawn on that day, and she rules over the alchemical stage of conjunction. And finally, it's the weekend. And we're at Saturday, and the weekend starts here with Saturn. I know a lot of people aren't a great fan of Saturn, but he has a lot of redeeming qualities, which I'm going to mention to you here. Saturn is the planetary governor that rules the death and rebirth of the hero in the underworld at Capricorn. And he also guides the early life of the reborn champion during his passage through Aquarius. Otherwise known as Old Father Time, Saturn is a strict teacher who can make us feel frustrated, but he has our own best interests at heart. His presence in our lives only becomes a problem when we rail against his discipline. I think they call it in the Bible kicking against the pricks. I remember once reading that out in church when I used to go to Sunday school, that passage about never kick out against the pricks. I seem to have spent most of my life kicking out against the pricks. But anyway, it can seem when Saturn is around that nothing is going right in your life, while in reality is because the stern disciplinarian has interceded to prevent your passage through human existence from falling off the wheel of the zodiac into the abyss. If Saturn tells you to sit down and get on with your homework, it's probably best to just quietly obey. And I actually do find there is a certain sense of satisfaction and almost relief in accepting and acknowledging such constraints at times. Saturn was known as Ninurta to the Babylonians and Kronos to the Greeks. But whatever his name, this god does not take any prisoners. And we become much more aware of his restraining and restricting qualities at the times of our Saturn return. And you might be wondering now, what is a Saturn return? So I'm going to explain it to you. We each experiences three instances of the Saturn return in our lives because it's when the planet stations back in our charts at the same place it was at the time of our birth. The planet of Saturn is a slow mover, glacially slow. He refuses to be hurried. And so he takes around 29 years to complete his orbit around the Sun. This means that we experience our Saturn return every 29 years, roughly around the ages of 29, 58, and 87. His day of the week is Saturday, and so his advice centre is open for the first hour after dawn on that day. And his alchemical stage is coagulation. So that's a brief introduction to the 7 gods and goddesses. Now, to conclude this teaching, I'd like to add a word or two about the Earth. Earth. I mean, after all, not only is it a planet too, but it is the 4th one from the Sun and the only astronomical orb that is known to harbour life. So far, anyway. That might change, but at the moment, it's just us. So what about its planetary governance? In my experience, the Fae, otherwise known as the fairies, are the rulers here on this middle world planet. They are the spirits of the lands and of the seas of the entire Earth. There are almost as many different names for fairy folk as there are countries. For instance, they are the Fada in Portugal, the Fee in Germany, the Twyleth Teg in Wales, the Vila in Bosnia, the Nepi in Kazakhstan, the Devas in India, the Peri in Turkey, the Zanash in Albania, the Nang Tiem in Vietnam, the Diwata in the Philippines, the Fiji in Afrikaans, the Potipara to the Mahari, and the Junia to the Arabs, to mention a mere few. I hope I haven't mispronounced. I think I may have mispronounced a couple of those, but please forgive me for that. Anyway, it is so surprising to me that so many people all over the world have a name for a species of being that so few will admit exists. So I hope you've enjoyed this broadcast as much as I have. It's been a great pleasure to share my work with you, and I look forward to seeing you next time. You've been listening to Annie Dieu-Le-Veut. You can buy my books on Amazon, and if you'd like to donate to my work, I'm Shaman of Avalon on Patreon. Now let's enjoy Stephen Newton's Two Worlds playing us out.